Welcome to Watch the Book. Today we present Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, published in 1597. In the sun-drenched streets of Verona, an ancient grudge between two noble families, the Montagues and the Capulets, once again erupts into violence, shattering the city's fragile peace. Capulet servants Samson and Gregory provoke a fight with Montague men, biting their thumbs in a gesture of gross disrespect. Swords are drawn, and the public square becomes a battlefield of insults and steel. The noble Benvolio, a Montague, tries to intervene and restore peace, but his efforts are thwarted by the arrival of the fiery Tybalt, a Capulet, who despises the very word and attacks Benvolio with fury. The brawl escalates as citizens join the fray, their shouts echoing through the streets. The heads of both houses, old Capulet and Montague, arrive to join the fight, held back only by their wives. Prince Aeschylus of Verona arrives with his retinue, his voice thundering over the chaos. He condemns the feuding families for their endless brawls and declares a new decree: any further disturbance will be paid with their lives. With the crowd dispersed, Lady Montague anxiously asks Benvolio about her son, Romeo, relieved that he was not present at the fight. Benvolio recounts seeing Romeo wandering alone before dawn, seeking solitude. Lord Montague describes his son's recent melancholy, how Romeo locks himself in his chambers, creating an artificial night, and how the cause of his deep sorrow remains a complete mystery to his family. Romeo appears and his parents depart, allowing Benvolio to discover the source of his cousin's gloom. Romeo confesses he is in love with a woman who has sworn a vow of chastity and will not return his affection. Romeo poetically describes his unrequited love as a brawling, loving hate, a heavy lightness, a chaotic form. He is heartbroken, lost in the paradox of a love that brings him only profound sadness and despair. Benvolio advises Romeo to forget the woman by examining other beauties, but Romeo insists that seeing other women will only serve to remind him of his own love's unparalleled fairness. He feels hopeless. On another Verona street, the noble Count Paris speaks with Lord Capulet, formally asking for his daughter Juliet's hand in marriage. Capulet is hesitant, stating that Juliet, not yet 14, is too young. Capulet tells Paris to wait 2 more years, but invites him to a feast at his house that very night. There, he can woo Juliet and win her heart. Her consent is a vital part of any marriage agreement. Capulet gives a servant a list of guests to invite to the feast, but the servant cannot read. He fatefully encounters Romeo and Benvolio, asking for their help to decipher the names on the list. Romeo reads the list and discovers that Rosalind, the woman he loves, will be attending the Capulet feast. The servant, unaware of their identity, invites them both to attend if they are not of the house of Montague. Benvolio sees an opportunity. He urges Romeo to go to the feast to compare Rosalind with Verona's other beauties, promising he will make Romeo see his love as nothing more than a crow. Romeo agrees to go, but only to see Rosalind. Inside the Capulet house, Lady Capulet calls for her daughter Juliet. The nurse, who raised Juliet from infancy, reminisces with bawdy humor about Juliet's childhood, recalling an earthquake and a silly joke from her late husband. Lady Capulet asks Juliet to consider marriage, informing her that the valiant Paris seeks her for his love. She encourages her daughter to study Paris's handsome features at the feast that evening. The nurse enthusiastically praises Paris, calling him a man of wax, a perfect model of a man. Both she and Lady Capulet pressure Juliet to accept the match, framing it as a way to increase her own status and wealth. Juliet, dutiful and reserved, agrees to look at Paris with the intention of liking him, but promises her gaze will go no deeper than what her mother's consent allows. Her obedience is clear, but her passion is absent. On their way to the feast, Romeo, Benvolio, and their friend Mercutio jest while wearing masks. The witty and mercurial Mercutio tries to lift Romeo's heavy spirits, urging him to dance and be light. Romeo speaks of a foreboding dream, but Mercutio dismisses it with his famous Queen Mab speech, describing the tiny fairy who rides through lovers' brains and brings them dreams born of idle fantasy. Despite Mercutio's jesting, Romeo feels a sense of dread. His mind misgives some consequence hanging in the stars, a fear that this night's party will be the start of a terrible fate, leading to an untimely death. Inside Capulet's hall, the feast is alive with music and dancing. Lord Capulet welcomes his guests, reminiscing about his own masking days. Romeo, watching from the side, is suddenly struck by a vision of pure beauty. Romeo sees Juliet for the first time and is instantly mesmerized, asking a servant who she is. He declares he has never seen true beauty until this night, his love for Rosaline completely forgotten in a moment. Tybalt overhears Romeo's voice and recognizes him as a Montague. Enraged by the intrusion, he calls for his sword, ready to strike Romeo dead for scorning their family's solemn feast. Lord Capulet intervenes, stopping his furious nephew. He has heard good things of Romeo's character throughout Verona and refuses to have his celebration disrupted. He commands Tybalt to be patient and ignore the boy. Tybalt reluctantly obeys his uncle but vows that this intrusion, now seeming sweet, will convert to the bitterest gall. He withdraws, his heart filled with a burning, vengeful rage that will not be forgotten. Romeo approaches Juliet, speaking to her in a sonnet. He describes his lips as two blushing pilgrims, ready to smooth the rough touch of his hand with a tender kiss on the holy shrine of her own hand. Juliet, playing along with his religious metaphor, replies that palm to palm is a holy palmer's kiss. Their witty and flirtatious exchange quickly deepens into a shared, profound attraction. Romeo gently insists, and their lips meet for the first time. He kisses her, purging his sin, and when she claims his sin is now on her lips, he playfully takes it back with a second, tender kiss. The nurse interrupts, telling Juliet her mother wants to speak with her. As Juliet leaves, Romeo asks the nurse who her mother is and learns the devastating truth. She is the daughter of Lord Capulet, his family's great enemy. After Romeo has departed with his friends, Juliet asks the nurse to identify him. The nurse returns with the equally shattering news. His name is Romeo, and he is a Montague, the only son of her family's hated foe. Juliet is heartbroken, lamenting that her only love has sprung from her only hate. She realizes she has seen him too early without knowing who he was, and has learned the truth far too late to change her heart. Leaving the feast, Romeo cannot bring himself to go home. He feels drawn back to Juliet, the center of his new world. He climbs the high orchard wall of the Capulet estate, seeking her out once more. Benvolio and Mercutio search for their friend, calling for him in the darkness. Mercutio, ever the jester, playfully conjures Romeo in Rosaline's name, unaware that Romeo's heart has found a new object of devotion. Hidden in the Capulet garden, Romeo watches as a light appears in a window above him. Juliet steps out onto her balcony, and Romeo is breathless, comparing her radiant beauty to the rising sun. Unaware that she is being watched, Juliet sighs and speaks into the night. "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" She asks why he must be a Montague, wishing he would refuse his name for her love. Juliet continues her soliloquy, reasoning that a name is just a word and not an essential part of a person. She declares that if Romeo would doff his name, she would give him all of herself in return. Romeo can no longer stay silent. He speaks from the shadows below, taking her at her word and promising to be newly baptized if she will only call him her love. Juliet is startled, asking who is there. Though she does not recognize his face in the dark, she knows his voice. She warns him that if her kinsmen find him here, in this place of death for a Montague, they will surely murder him. Romeo, unafraid, tells her that he flew over the walls on love's light wings. He claims there is more peril in her eyes than in 20 of their swords. A sweet look from her is all the protection he needs. Overcoming her initial modesty, Juliet speaks frankly of her love. a passion he overheard before she was aware of his presence. She asks for his faithful vow, and they exchange promises of devotion in the moonlight. Juliet stops Romeo from swearing by the inconstant moon. The moment feels too rash, too sudden. Instead, she proposes that if his love is honorable and his purpose is marriage, he should send word to her tomorrow. After a reluctant farewell, Juliet returns to her balcony one last time. They agree that she will send a messenger to him at 9 in the morning to learn the plans for their secret wedding. Parting is such sweet sorrow for the new lovers. They say good night again and again until Juliet finally retreats into her chamber. Romeo, his heart soaring, decides to seek the help of his spiritual advisor. In his cell at dawn, Friar Lawrence gathers herbs, speaking of their dual nature, how the same plant can hold both poison and medicine. He reflects that this duality of grace and rude will also exist in man. Romeo arrives, and the friar correctly guesses he has not been to bed. The friar assumes Romeo has spent the night with Rosaline, but Romeo joyfully declares he has forgotten that name and its woe entirely. Romeo explains that his heart is now set on the daughter of rich Capulet, and that she loves him in return. He implores the friar to consent to marry them that very day, uniting them in holy matrimony. Friar Lawrence is shocked by this sudden change, chiding Romeo for his fickle heart and young men's love that lies in their eyes, not their hearts. He reminds Romeo of the countless tears he shed for Rosaline. Despite his reservations, the friar agrees to help. He sees a chance in this alliance, a hope that their marriage may be the happy cause that finally turns the rancor of their two households to pure love. Meanwhile, Benvolio and Mercutio wonder where Romeo has been. They reveal that Tybalt, the Prince of Cats and a deadly duelist, has sent a formal letter of challenge to the Montague household. Romeo joins his friends, his cheerful mood restored. He engages in a lively battle of wits with Mercutio, who is delighted to see his friend sociable again and no longer groaning for love. The nurse and her servant, Peter, arrive, searching for Romeo. Mercutio mocks the nurse with a stream of bawdy jokes before he and Benvolio depart for dinner, leaving Romeo to speak with her. The nurse warns Romeo not to lead Juliet into a fool's paradise. Romeo assures her his intentions are true and gives her the message for Juliet. She is to devise a way to come to confession at the friar's cell that afternoon. At the friar's cell, Juliet will be absolved and married. Romeo also tells the nurse to stay behind the abbey wall, where his man will bring a rope ladder so he can ascend to Juliet's chamber for their wedding night. In the Capulet orchard, Juliet waits impatiently for the nurse's return. It has been 3 long hours since she sent her, and she frets, wishing that love's heralds were as swift as thoughts. The nurse finally arrives, but playfully complains of her aches and pains, teasing Juliet by delaying the news. She praises Romeo's handsome features, but evades the main question, driving Juliet to distraction. At last, the nurse tells Juliet the plan. She has leave to go to shrift today at Friar Lawrence's cell, where a husband waits to make her a wife. Juliet, overjoyed, rushes off to her secret wedding. In the cell, Friar Lawrence offers a prayer and a word of caution to the impassioned Romeo, warning him that violent delights have violent ends. He advises Romeo to love moderately for a long and lasting love. Juliet arrives, her joy so immense she cannot put it into words. Her true love, she says, is a wealth so great she cannot sum up even half of it. The friar leads them away to be married without delay. Later, in the sweltering heat of the Verona streets, Benvolio and Mercutio encounter Tybalt and other Capulets. Benvolio, sensing danger in the hot weather, urges his friend to retire and avoid a brawl. Tybalt confronts Romeo, who has just arrived, calling him a villain. Romeo, now secretly related to Tybalt by marriage, refuses to fight, speaking of a love for Tybalt that he cannot yet understand. Mercutio is disgusted by what he sees as Romeo's calm, dishonorable submission. He draws his own sword and challenges Tybalt, the king of cats, to a duel, the two begin to fight fiercely. Romeo, desperate to keep the peace and uphold the prince's decree, steps between the dueling men. As he does, Tybalt thrusts his sword under Romeo's arm, delivering a fatal wound to Mercutio. Mercutio, mortally wounded, curses both the Montagues and the Capulets, crying a plague of both your houses. Benvolio helps the fainting Mercutio offstage, where he dies from his injury. Consumed by grief and rage, Romeo feels his reputation has been stained. When Tybalt returns in triumph, Romeo's love for Juliet has made him effeminate no more. He challenges Tybalt to a fight to the death. In a flash of fury and lightning-fast swordplay, Romeo avenges his friend's death, slaying Tybalt in the street. Benvolio urges him to flee before the prince arrives and sentences him to death. Romeo cries that he is fortune's fool. The prince, the Capulets, and the Montagues arrive at the scene of the bloodshed. After hearing Benvolio's testimony, the prince makes his judgment. In place of death, Romeo is banished from Verona forever. In her chamber, Juliet waits for night and for her new husband, Romeo. The nurse enters, weeping, and in her grief-stricken state, confusingly implies that it is Romeo who has been killed. Juliet is thrown into despair, but the nurse clarifies, Tybalt is dead, and it was Romeo who killed him. For this crime, Romeo has been banished. The conflicting news tears Juliet's heart in two. At first, Juliet curses Romeo's name, but she quickly retracts her words, realizing her loyalty must be to her husband. That Tybalt would have killed Romeo is a comfort, but the word banished is a sorrow beyond all others. The nurse promises to find Romeo, who is hiding at Friar Lawrence's cell, and bring him to Juliet's chamber to comfort her and take his last farewell. Juliet gives the nurse a ring to deliver to her husband as a token. At the friar's cell, Romeo learns of his sentence. He sees banishment as a fate worse than death, for it is a world without Juliet. He falls to the ground, weeping and overcome with grief and despair. The nurse arrives and finds Romeo in a state of wild grief. Friar Lawrence scolds him for his unmanly tears and offers a plan. Romeo will go to Juliet's chamber for their wedding night, but must leave for Mantua before dawn. The friar assures Romeo that he will announce the marriage at a later, more opportune time, reconcile the families, and beg pardon from the prince, allowing Romeo to return with joy. The nurse gives Romeo the ring from Juliet. Dawn breaks. Romeo and Juliet share a final embrace in her chamber. They argue whether the bird they hear is the nightingale or the lark, which signals the morning and his necessary departure. The nurse warns that Lady Capulet is coming. With a final kiss, Romeo descends from the balcony. As he looks up from below, Juliet has an ill-divining vision of him, looking pale, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. Lady Capulet enters and, seeing Juliet weeping, assumes it is for Tybalt. She reveals a plan to send a man to Mantua to poison Romeo. Juliet, in a cleverly worded reply, feigns agreement while protecting her husband. To lift her daughter's spirits, Lady Capulet announces joyful news. Juliet is to be married to County Paris on the upcoming Thursday. Juliet is horrified and flatly refuses, declaring she would rather marry Romeo, whom she hates. Lord Capulet enters and flies into a vicious rage upon hearing of Juliet's disobedience. He threatens to disown her, to drag her to the church, and to let her hang, beg, and starve in the streets if she does not obey his will. Desperate, Juliet pleads with her mother, who coldly rejects her. She then turns to her last hope, the nurse, for comfort and counsel, but the nurse advises her to forget Romeo and marry Paris, praising the Count. Feeling utterly betrayed, Juliet sends the nurse away with a lie, saying she is going to Friar Lawrence's cell to make confession. Once alone, she decides her only hope lies with the friar's remedy or her own power to die. In the cell, Juliet finds Paris speaking with the friar about the wedding. After Paris leaves, Juliet, in a state of absolute desperation, shows the friar a knife and says she will kill herself rather than marry Paris. The friar proposes a dangerous solution. He gives her a vial containing a sleeping potion that will make her appear dead for 42 hours. Her family will place her in a Capulet tomb from which Romeo can rescue her. Back at home, Juliet appears repentant to her father and agrees to the marriage. Lord Capulet is so overjoyed that he moves the wedding day up from Thursday to Wednesday, a fatal change in the friar's careful plan. Alone in her chamber that night, Juliet is assailed by a wave of terrifying fears. What if the potion doesn't work? What if it's a poison? What if she wakes up alone in the tomb surrounded by the bones of her ancestors? Pushing through her terror and thinking she sees Tybalt's ghost seeking Romeo, she raises the vial in a toast to her husband. "Romeo, I drink to thee," she says, and consumes the potion, falling lifelessly onto her bed. In Mantua, a cheerful Romeo's dream is interrupted by Balthazar, who brings the false news of Juliet's death. Devastated, Romeo cries, "Then I defy you, stars," and resolves to return to Verona to lie with his wife that very night. Desperate for the means to an end, Romeo seeks out a desperately poor apothecary. He uses a large sum of gold to tempt the man's wretchedness, illegally buying a fast-acting poison, which he calls a cordial, intending to drink it at his wife's side in the Capulet tomb. Back in Verona, Friar Lawrence learns his crucial letter never reached Romeo due to a plague quarantine. Realizing Juliet will wake alone, the friar, filled with dread, hastily grabs a crowbar to rescue her himself. At the tomb, a grieving Paris is interrupted by Romeo, believing Romeo a vandal. Paris confronts him. In the ensuing fight, the grief-maddened Romeo slays the noble count. Inside the tomb, Romeo is stunned by Juliet's lifelike beauty, noting the crimson still in her lips and cheeks. After a heartbreaking final soliloquy and one last kiss for his beloved wife, he drinks the swift poison and dies at her side. Friar Lawrence arrives to a scene of carnage. Just as he discovers the bodies of Romeo and Paris, Juliet begins to stir. He urges her to flee with him, but the noise of the approaching watch causes him to panic and abandon her in the tomb. Juliet awakens to find her love lying dead, a poison cup in his hand. She kisses his still warm lips, hoping a friendly drop remains. Hearing the watch, she finds his dagger, declaring, "O happy dagger, this is thy sheath," and ends her life. The prince, Capulets, and Montagues arrive to the horrific scene. After hearing the friar's story and reading Romeo's letter, the truth is revealed. Seeing the tragic result of their hate, the fathers finally take hands, ending their feud over their children. If you enjoyed this retelling of a timeless classic, be sure to subscribe to watch the book for more great stories brought to life. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below.